Okay, stop me if this sounds familiar. Sometimes you're doing something, whether it's playing a video game or working on a project or practicing a hobby you have, and an hour can fly by without you even noticing because you're totally focused and in the moment. Other times you're trying to get something done and you just don't want to do it at all. And the thing is, a lot of people associate this feeling of procrastination with work. But the truth is, it's something that can actually happen when you're doing stuff like practicing piano or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or something that you really want to do. And a lot of people associate procrastination with laziness, but psychologists have found that procrastination isn't really a time management problem so much as an emotion management problem. So in this video, I'm going to give you the 4 most common reasons for procrastination and some quite surprising tools for dealing with them. And we're going to start with maybe the most common one of all, which is you're avoiding unpleasantness. So at its core, most procrastination is a way of dealing with negative emotions that come up when you think about certain tasks. And those can range from boredom and frustration to anxiety, insecurity, and self-doubt. Basically, if a task seems unpleasant, which often happens because you're insecure about your ability to cope with it, your brain's amygdala, which controls the fight or flight response, sees it as a threat and tries to avoid it. The good news is this is the simplest thing to fix, and it's been brilliantly explained by Tim Urban in a blog post and TED Talk that I'll link to in the comments. The basic idea is that tasks that are big and ill-defined, like get in shape or write a book, are icky, which means that there's no clear starting point or way of getting through them. And so the key is to split these big, icky tasks into small, manageable tasks that you can get started on straight away. So if your goal is to get in shape, a smaller and more manageable task might be to eat 20 grams of protein at each meal. But an even more clear goal might be to make a list of 5 easy meals that have 20 grams of protein each in them, and then buy the ingredients for them. Or if you're writing a book, this can be even simpler. The small, well-defined task might be to block out 15 minutes a day where your only job is to sit down and write. You don't have to write, but you're not allowed to do anything else. By the way, I call this the work or nothing rule, and I wrote about it in my newsletter a while ago, and I'll link to it in the comments, but do sign up if you get a chance. Thank you. But anyway, by breaking the task down enough, the idea is that you make the next step so easy that it would almost seem silly not to do it. But crucially, this doesn't work if the task isn't interesting enough. And so this is obviously pretty common with tasks that were assigned at work, but it can also happen with things that we're supposedly doing for fun. In his book Flow, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi explains that we're most immersed in tasks when they're a challenge for our level of skill, but not too challenging. If the demands of a task exceed our skills, like if we have to give a presentation that we're not ready for, we're just going to freak out and we won't be any good. But if our tasks are too easy, like doing data entry or answering endless customer emails, we get bored and we start to procrastinate. And this also happens when we do stuff that's supposed to be enjoyable. So for instance, a lot of people find piano scales boring because they're too easy, but sight reading is off-putting because it's often too hard. Or for instance, in Jiu-Jitsu, a lot of people will practice a movement once or twice, then give up because it's too boring, but they'll also sit rounds out in sparring because it feels too hard. And so when we're doing a hobby, the answer is to just kind of play with the level of challenge you're getting until it's just challenge enough to keep you interested. So if you're doing scales, that might mean trying to play them faster, or really emphasizing the dynamics, or playing them staccato or legato. Or in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it might mean asking your partner to provide a bit more resistance so that you have to get the move right, or playing games so that sparring isn't like a constant war. And in work, one solution to this is obviously to try and find tasks that better match your skill set. But if you can't do that, which is kind of likely because you have to do what you're told to do at work, then you have to find ways to make what you're already doing more interesting. So I think one resource that's great for this is Timothy Gallwey's The Inner Game of Work, which I've mentioned in a video before. And in that, he suggests trying to do things like non-judgmentally notice the emotions or mood of other people in like meetings or emails or on calls, which can help your interest in what you're doing, but is also likely to make you better at your job. But again, none of this is going to work if you can't connect what you're doing to the future. So at the heart of it, procrastination is quite often about feeling sort of better in the short term, even if it means you'll feel worse later. Kind of. Because the thing is, you often don't feel that good when you're procrastinating. Like if you've ever spent an hour on Twitter or rewatching old TV shows instead of doing something important, you probably recognize that sort of gross feeling of not enjoying what you're doing even while you procrastinate. Tim Urban calls this the dark playground. But I think a real issue is viewing the consequences of your delaying as something that somebody else will experience. We haven't really evolved to think that far ahead into the future because in our past we always needed to focus mostly on the here and now. And there's research from a doctor called Hal Hirschfield that shows that on a neural level we perceive our future selves more like strangers than as part of ourselves. So when we procrastinate, parts of our brains actually think that the tasks that we're putting off and the accompanying negative feelings that await us on the other side are kind of somebody else's problem. And something that's really helped me out with this is connecting the work that I know I need to do in the present moment with the future that I want to live in. And a great way I've found to do that is what poker player Annie Duke calls backcasting. So the idea is that when we identify a goal and work backwards from there to remember how we got there, we actually work better at pursuing it. In one experiment, researchers found that prospective hindsight, or imagining that an event has already occurred, increases the ability to correctly identify reasons for future outcomes by 30%. So the example that Duke gives is that when Frederick Law Olmsted designed Central Park, he recognised that a lot of the charm of the park and a lot of the enjoyment that people would get from it would take decades to see as the landscape changed and matured. People walking through Central Park when it opened to the public would have seen a lot of empty terrain, but Olmsted was able to visualise an end result and take the steps towards that. And obviously this also works with more personal goals. So for instance, one of my kind of medium to long-term goals is to be more financially independent so that I can spend more time with my 6-year-old as he grows up. And backcasting that means that I can identify the steps that will move me closer to that goal, like regularly posting to this channel and building up like a range of freelance contacts. Or on a smaller scale, when I decided that I wanted to one day be able to play Maple Leaf Rag on the pianos at King's Cross, I was able to identify all the processes that would help me get there, which is basically practicing every day and working on my ragtime skills. But what this brings us to is one of the most common reasons people procrastinate, and I think it's one that gets overlooked quite a lot, which is that it's just a habit. Because the thing is, there are an almost infinite number of ways to actually procrastinate, and it's basically impossible to block yourself off from all of them. So that means that any long-term solution you come up with is going to have to be an internal one, and it's going to be a mindset shift rather than a quick fix. And one of the best fixes is probably to do the opposite of what you currently do when you procrastinate, which is to not beat yourself up over it. So in a 2010 study, researchers found that students who were able to forgive themselves for procrastinating when studying for a first exam ended up procrastinating less when studying for their next exam. And they concluded that self-forgiveness supported productivity by allowing the individual to move past their maladaptive behaviour and focus on the upcoming examination without the burden of past acts. Other studies have found that self-compassion leads us to being more mentally healthy overall, which can boost motivation, enhances feelings of self-worth, and crucially decreases psychological distress, which obviously is a primary culprit for procrastination. So you should definitely aim to break your tasks down, make them more interesting, and connect them to the future. But maybe the most important thing to do is to be nice to yourself when you actually do procrastinate. Or if you want one final bit of advice, then I'd suggest having a range of things to do so that when you're procrastinating on one, you can still spend time on another. And if you want some advice about those, check out this video. I hope to see you over there, but in the meantime, I'm going to go and practice the piano.